How's it going, everybody? Welcome into the Skyline Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Jack Hartman, joined, as always, by my good friend, my co-host on the West Coast, Nick Normand. Nick, how you doing today, man?
Doing well, Jack. We're just about 1 week away exactly from the NFL draft, and you can just feel draft season that everybody's kind of got their boards set. Everybody just wants to open up the new presents that we're getting with draft day, man. Nobody wants to wait around and just see what happens for the next week. We want to know now what we're getting,
Yep.
and I'm super excited about it, man. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing well. It's a little bit cooler of a day for April here in Texas, but still a good day. Happy to be here, hopping on and doing what we're doing. So we need to talk about, just to kind of wrap up our going through team by team and their free agency and what as we've been going over the last few weeks, sort of talking about what teams have done and what we view as their most important gaps that they still need to fill in the draft. Again, we're not saying that means that round one pick has to fill this. We might have what's something that isn't a top priority for them, but you just have a guy that's sitting there that's too good, that they need to draft. But at some point throughout their course of the draft, their draft picks, they need to take care of it. And so we started in the AFC. We did the AFC North and the AFC East. Then we did the AFC South and AFC West. Last time we did the NFC North and NFC East, and now we're doing the NFC South and the NFC West. And so we're going to start with the NFC South. The first team that we have here is the Atlanta Falcons. And so let me just share my screen here so we can take a look at this. So here we are, the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons had an interesting year yet last year. I think there was a lot of hype around them because of a lot of the guys that they brought in, most namely being Kirk Cousins, and just didn't really work. So they've already moved on to Michael Penix Jr. So we'll still see. There's definitely still a big asterisk with this team of, are they going to trade Kirk Cousins? Are we going to see maybe a draft night deal of Kirk Cousins somewhere that will significantly change things for them in terms of what they have to work with? But outside of that, they signed Leonard Floyd to a one-year deal. They signed Divine Diablo, Morgan Fox, Mike Ford, Jamal Agnew, Jordan Fuller. They re-signed Mike Hughes, Kadarrell Hodge, Contavious Street, Taquan Graham, Felipe Franks. They have Felipe Franks listed as a tight end. Isn't he the former quarterback of the Florida Gators?
Former quarterback.
How about that? All right, Felipe Franks moving to tight end. They re-signed Kyle Hinton, re-signed Josh Woods, re-signed Elijah Wilkinson, extended Liam McCullough, extended Jake Matthews, and released Grady Jarrett. So Nick, as you look at this, what are your thoughts with this Atlanta Falcons team just right off the bat?
I just feel like it's more of the same with the Falcons. Ever since that Super Bowl year back in 2016, it seems like they've just never been able to get the pass rush right, that they've never been able to get the D-line quite right outside of Grady Jarrett. And now without Grady Jarrett, I think defensive tackle and interior needs way more help than it previously did. They obviously signed Morgan Moses to replace Jarrett, but I still think that you're releasing a leader in Jarrett. You're releasing a dude who's been a Falcon his whole career. You're releasing a dude who has provided Pro Bowl level play. And you're replacing that with Morgan Fox, who played well last year, but there's a reason that he signed a 2-year, $8.5 million contract, because he's not Grady Jarrett. He's not Pro Bowl level player, difference maker kind of player. And so I think edge rush and defensive tackle pop out to me first, where those are the clear sorts of needs for me right now with the Falcons. It's been that way for years and years and years and years. And they've tried and addressed it with free agents and with draft picks and just trying to move dudes around. And it feels like Leonard Floyd potentially could be one of their better free agent signings, trying to fill in that edge rush position. But Leonard Floyd has been passed around from team to team to team to team and only sticks around for maybe a year or 2 years at most. And he's good. He's going to be good for 6 to 8.5 sacks, maybe 10 sacks if he's playing with Aaron Donald. But man, it just seems like he's going to be a dude who's going to be a 1-year fill-in guy. And you still got questions about the edge rush position. So those are the two that pop out to me first here.
Yeah, I definitely agree that defensive line for this team is a big need, regardless of what position it is. I think the Falcons have set themselves up well, considering how deep of an edge draft this is, at least in the first round for sure. But also there's some guys, that are going to get taken in later rounds that are good too. And I think Atlanta is set up in a really, really good spot to get maybe one of the Georgia guys, maybe a Mike Green, maybe a Shamar Stewart, or a Nick Scorton, and some of those guys. And so I would be surprised if Atlanta doesn't use their first round pick on an edge, just because that is a need. They're positioned in a really good place to get one. And we have some really, really good edges. Oh, excuse me. Have some really good edges in this draft. So I think that edge and defensive tackle are definitely top needs for them. Nick, would you say that wide receiver is a need for this team? I feel like we've sort of been less talking about wide receiver with this team in years as of late, because they went for a long time with having that really good dynamic number one guy. They had Julio Jones for forever. Then they had Calvin Ridley. They drafted Drake London a few years back. But I don't know. You've got a young quarterback in Michael Penix Jr. I think this is a team that could use maybe another guy on the outside, another playmaker on the outside. What do you think?
I like that. Right now, they got Drake London penciled in as their wide receiver one, and he's been really good. He had a breakout season, 1,200 yards this year. Great. Darnell Mooney, good wide receiver too, but has had injury issues, has had some inconsistency issues, was dangerous for a couple of games last year. Mm-hmm. But then their wide receiver 3 right now is Ray McLeod, who is, I'll call him a designated special teamer with some gadget utility ability, but you don't want a gadget utility ability type wide receiver as your third wide receiver. And you also don't want to rely on Kyle Pitts being that receiver when he just has not worked out as a draft pick, as a 4 overall draft pick. And I believe he's in the last year of his contract too. So
there's trade talk around him for sure.
Mm-hmm. But he hasn't been able to grow into the player that they wanted him to be, and he'll likely not be on the roster in a year or so from now. And so you're really in need for potentially a depth pass catcher, I would say, where if they went wide receiver in the 3rd round, I think that'd be a really good range for them there. But I don't think it's a 1st or 2nd round need for them probably at this point.
Yeah. No, I agree. But yeah, honestly, I really like this Falcons roster. I think better quarterback play throughout the entire course of the season last year. Who knows? Maybe this team is winning that division. And yeah, so awesome. Yeah, so we've got for Atlanta, edge, defensive tackle, and wide receiver are sort of our top 3 for this team right here. Moving on to the Carolina Panthers. And the Carolina Panthers are weird, right? Because it seemed at one point last year, it was like, this is it. Bryce Young is a failure. It didn't work. It was a bust, and they're going to need to get a quarterback this draft. And now it's like, well, okay, those last couple games, Bryce Young finally showed some promise, showed a little bit why he was a 1st overall pick, and it gives the Panthers like a little bit of new life. I wouldn't say new life like, oh my gosh, they're competing for the division, but at least it feels like there's a future with this team, which I think if you talk to the Panthers organization and their fans, in that first half of last season, you'd be like, what is this team? What are we doing? What is our future? Like all of that. But that being said, this offseason they signed Tershawn Wharton They signed Trayvon Moehrig. They signed Patrick Jones, Bobby Brown, Rico Dowdle, Sam Martin, Christian Roseboom. They re-signed Tommy Tremble, Michael Jackson, Brady Christensen, Andy Dalton, Raheem Blackshear, Dan Chisena, Austin Corbett, David Moore, and Nick Scott. And they extended J.C. Horn, and they released Miles Sanders. So this team, I look at them, because you signed Andy Dalton to a 2-year deal, I don't think you need to look. I mean, maybe, like a 6th-round pick of like Riley Leonard or something for quarterback, maybe, but certainly not like a top need for them. I think they like their running back room, which
yeah,
I think it's a decent running back room. It's not one that I would be like, we can't improve. But they clearly like Chuba Hubbard. Still haven't gotten to see what Jonathan Brooks can be, unfortunately, because of injury. Hopefully this can be a year for him that he gets healthy, stays healthy, and puts together a good year. They signed Rico Dowdle, who had a pretty solid year last year with the Cowboys, and they also re-signed Raheem Blackshear. So the running back room, I think they like their running back room. Again, that would be like a 7th round. Hey, there's this running back, that we like out of Southern Mississippi or something like that. that we haven't really heard of. But again, it's a deep running back draft class, so something like that. I think you got to get a wide receiver if you're the Carolina Panthers. Like right now, their wide receivers that I can think of, you have Xavier Legette, who showed some promise last year as a rookie, but he's a rookie and has some room to improve. You have Adam Thielen, who's like 104 years old. For a white wide receiver, he's old. And so I think that you saw significant progression towards the end of the year with Bryce Young. You need to help that as much as possible. I think they're in a really good position to draft a guy like Teteroa and McMillan in this draft. I think wide receiver has to be a need for them. What do you think?
I think wide receiver is definitely a big need for them. Thielen's going to be turning 35 in August, so he's going to be quite old for a wide receiver. He did have a 1,000-yard year 2 years ago with the Panthers.
Mm-hmm.
Considering that he's on his 3rd season with the Panthers is kind of crazy, because he was with that Vikings team for a number of years and came into the league pretty old, if I remember, out of Minnesota State, if I'm remembering correctly. But man, he came into the league older and he was there for a number of years. And he's already been with the Panthers now going on his 3rd year. So that's kind of been a pleasant surprise, I think. I'd consider it a pleasant surprise that he's turned out to be a pretty good signing for the Panthers when it seemed like it could have been done. Coker's also on this roster. He showed some things last year. I think Coker, though, slides in really well as a wide receiver 3. Legette as a wide receiver 1/2, maybe a 1B kind of dude. And so I definitely think a wide receiver, as you were saying, could fit in really well to kind of make everybody fill their roles better. I'd also just offer so much of the defense. It feels like the defense has a bunch of replaceable players, where Derek Brown on the D-line's good and J.C. Horn at corner's good. Yeah. Both of those are potential Pro Bowl, All-Pro level players, potentially. But outside of that, it's a bunch of just traveling team to team, can't find a home kind of dudes that are all really replaceable, I'd consider. Mm-hmm. So I think the whole defense is kind of on notice outside of those 2 dudes who I think are the studs who are going to be sticking around there.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, they've done a lot they've moved on from a lot of guys here recently. I mean, the big one, like from their defense in particular, the big one, Brian Burns, left. Looking at, I'm just pulling it up right now just to see the picks that they have. They have their own 1st round pick at number 8 overall. They have the Los Angeles Rams 2nd round pick at 57, their own 3rd at 74, their own 4th at 111, the Cowboys 4th rounder that was traded for Jonathan Mingo. Jonathan? Is it Jonathan Mingo?
Jonathan Mingo. You're right.
Yeah, Jonathan Mingo. The New York Giants 5th round pick, number 140. Their own 5th, 146. The Ravens 5th at 163, and the Cardinals 7th at number 230. So they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They've got 9 draft picks, and so there's definitely picks there that you can draft a receiver definitely. Probably you'll want to take an offensive lineman at some point also, but you've got a lot of picks that you can just be like, let's just draft defensive guys. Let's just draft best available defensive guys and see what happens. I mean, I think especially that 2nd round pick belonging to the Rams at pick 57, there's definitely still going to be one of those upper echelon that we're still talking about edge rushers there. Just because there's so many of them. And so I think if you take Teteroa McMillan at pick number 8, and then you take an edge at 57. I think that's a really, really good draft for the Carolina Panthers and a good start for them as they look to improve. So with that, we have the Carolina Panthers. Their top 2 needs: wide receiver and edge, and because of how valuable the edge position is. And then I don't know, probably another corner would probably be next best thing. Maybe linebacker. But yeah, so Carolina wide receiver and defensive guys. But again, and Nick, you and I were talking about this before we started recording. Like, it's weird, but there are a lot of these teams here in the NFC South and the NFC West. It's interesting how like we paired these 2 divisions together as we're doing this, but have like. No, they've got a roster that like we don't hate, like it's got guys on it. It's got starting caliber players on it, but it doesn't have the flash, right? It doesn't have a guy that's like, oh, but that's the dude, or those 3 guys are the dudes on that team. And I think the Carolina Panthers are a good example of this. Like, they have holes, don't get me wrong. But also, if you look at what their wide receiver position is, like they have guys that are starting caliber wide receivers in the NFL, on their roster. So interesting there. Moving on to the New Orleans Saints, who have a really, really interesting sort of what are you going to do when your pick comes up at pick number 9? I think pick number 9. Yeah, right after the Panthers. In that we heard recently that Saints starting quarterback Derek Carr has a shoulder issue that could potentially jeopardize what he's able to do this next season and how much he's able to play this next season. And we kind of thought, lots of people thought, well, the Saints might be a team that, hey, they might look to draft Jackson Dart at pick number 9, and have him for the future if they like him. And now, with all the reports being that Shedeur Sanders is not going to be picked in the top 3 picks, then it's like, okay, well, if he's there at 9, like the Saints, that might make their decision for them. So interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens there at pick number 9. I think pick number 9 is definitely a hinge point in the draft of, depending on what the Saints do, is going to significantly affect everything else. But that being said, what they've already done to improve their roster here in free agency, they signed Justin Reed, they signed Isaac Yardome, they signed Brandon Cooks, bring him back to New Orleans. They signed Jack Stoll, they signed Dylan Reduns, they signed Will Clapp, they traded for Devon Godcho. They re-signed Chase Young to a 3-year deal. They re-signed Juwan Johnson to a 3-year deal. They re-signed Dante Pettis, who I didn't even realize was on that roster. That's on me. Re-signed corner Ugo Amadi, re-signed guard Landon Young, and released running back Jamal Williams. Nick, what do you make of this New Orleans Saints team that feels like for basically since Drew Brees retired, hey, it's time to rebuild, but they still haven't done it yet? What do you think? What do you think is the best case scenario for this team?
So generally, when I look at this roster, I look at 2 kind of philosophies. One is just kind of best player available. because now with the Carr injury situation, I think that clearly puts quarterbacks square on their list of needs. And the other thing is that, like, this roster, although it's not bad, it doesn't have any positions I would consider to be absolute strengths, where
Yeah.
it doesn't have a bunch of weaknesses, but it's not like they have a killer pass rush, an offensive line that's awesome, a receiving core you can't guard. It just feels like they have a lot of solid, a lot of good, not a lot of terrible, not a lot of bad, but just a lot of like middle of the road. And so I feel like they could definitely just go best player available. But the other areas that I kind of look at with this team, particularly, is replacing the old dudes. Where there are two dudes who I'm looking at square in the face who are older, who are kind of on their last legs as far as the last couple of years. It feels like we've been asking the question, not if they're going to hang it up, when they're going to hang it up. Like, it just feels like it's a matter of time. Specifically, I'm talking about Cam Jordan, who it seems like was defying father time for a number of years now. But his production finally did go down in the last year or so. And I'm also talking Tyrann Mathieu, who during his post Chiefs days has kind of still been solid, but has not been the game-changing type of safety that he was with the Chiefs and previously before that.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at safety is not necessarily a big position that you see drafted really highly, but I could definitely see them wanting to get a dude in there to replace Mathieu. And it feels like Mathieu is one of their few starting caliber dudes at safety. So I feel like that bumps up the need kind of for them. When Matthew's one of their two starting caliber safeties and he's older, it's like, okay, are you going to be playing one high safety? And if you have that safety get injured, you're just kind of screwed.
Yeah.
And with Cam Jordan, it feels like they kind of have had this rotational pass rusher on the other side of him, where it was Hendrickson, it was Zach Bond, it's Carl Granderson. It's kind of just an opposite edge rusher of Cam Jordan. And it seems like they've kind of produced well opposite him. But when they've invested really highly at edge opposite Cam Jordan, it feels like it hasn't worked out. Or it feels like right now Chase Young is pretty good, and he has kind of been up and down since being a bust kind of with Washington. He's kind of rebounded. His days with the 49ers and now with the Saints were good. But it feels like even if Chase Young is holding down one side of the line, it feels like that Cam Jordan side of the line and rotational guys coming in there that you might want to go with an edge rusher. So I'd be looking at safety with Tyrann Mathieu. I'd be looking at edge with Young or with Young / with Jordan. And then I still think that you could invest potentially with defensive tackle. Godshaw's good, and they also drafted a kid out of Clemson 2 years ago. I'm blanking on his name.
Brian Brzee.
Yeah, Brzee. And he was really good coming out, but was injured late in his college career. And that kind of made it to where he didn't turn out to be the player that people kind of thought he would be. Where pre-tearing up his knee, he was really athletic and big and strong. And post, he was really heavy-footed and not able to move quite as well. And so I don't know if they want to be investing in that 3 tech or that 1 tech to kind of go with him, or what they kind of want to do there. So I'm looking at those couple positions. I think that offensive line, every team can always invest in, but it feels like the Saints have invested so heavily where I don't know if they're going to invest another high pick in the O-line.
Yeah, I definitely agree about edge. I think similar to and I think it's interesting that this is similar to some of these other teams that we've talked about because of how different of a position the Saints are in. But when we talked about the Chiefs, when we talked about the Steelers, we talked about their defensive tackles that are game-changing defensive tackles. But it's like you don't want to lose them and then immediately draft a rookie that has no experience to go in and fill those shoes. You want to get an heir apparent, a guy that can learn, can get some experience before that time comes. The difference between those teams is both of those teams are playoff teams, and the Saints have not been a playoff team since Drew Brees retired, I'm pretty sure. So that, very different situation. But I do think that when you have such a centerpiece of your team, of your defensive unit, like Cameron Jordan, like Tyrann Mathieu, you want them to have the chance to train and to teach what they know to the next guy up. So I think if the Saints do not draft a quarterback with the 9th pick, I think I could really, really see them taking Shamar Stewart. I think one of the other things about this is more talking about Shamar Stewart than the Saints, but he's a guy that, whoever drafts him needs to have his cachet with that team. Saints front office, they've been there for a long time. They have the trust from ownership to take some swings. That might be some misses, right? And so I think Shamar Stewart. I think if the Saints do not select a quarterback at pick 9, Shamar Stewart to the Saints at pick 9, we could definitely see happen. Who is a guy that has the physical attributes to be a fiend, in the NFL. It's just we haven't seen it yet. So I agree there with edge. I could see safety. I think the difference for me with edge and safety is edge is rotated in more than safety. And so technically, like, they have Justin Reed and Tyrann Mathieu because they just signed Justin Reed to safety. So, like, you have your 2 starting safeties, where I feel like with edge, you need to have 3 or 4 guys that, like, yes, only 2 of them are starting, but they're playing not that different of a number of snaps, right? Because of the way that you rotate in. That being said, though, I agree with you that this is a team that it's like, hey, you just have places that you need to get better. Like, looking at their wide receiver room, okay, they have Chris Olave, they signed Brandon Cooks, they have Marquez Valdez-Scantling, they have Rashid Shaheed, and it's like, okay, you have guys that can play wide receiver and have shown flashes, but also, like, you don't have a guy that scares the crap out of your your opponent, or 2 guys, right? Like, you can defenses can be like, we're going to double Chris Olave, and if old man Brandon Cooks gives us the work, then, like, dang, all right, we're taking that risk, So yeah, and I also agree with you. Offensive line, every team can always have a better offensive line.
I'd also like to toss out just one other guy that I forgot to give a shout out to. Demario Davis still playing, and he's 36 years old, playing that inside linebacker position. He's obviously been phenomenal and underrated for a number of years now.
Yep.
But 36 years old, he kind of comps to another player who we're going to be talking about here soon with the next team we got here. But, man, it feels like an old linebacker that, besides him, like, I really think this should be Davis's last season, probably. If he goes into his age 37 season still playing a majority of the snaps, that's going to be way out of left field, I feel like, just with a linebacker playing that old. But outside of him, Pete Werner, Anthony Orji, like, that's not great linebacker play outside of Davis if Davis gets injured or retires.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think they have a chance. They have pick number 40 in the draft. I think they certainly have a chance to get a good linebacker there. Who knows with what's going to be the case with Jahad Campbell because of this labrum injury. I mean, it's like literally there are some people that are reporting like he might be a second round pick because of this. Like, that much. I think if he's there at 40 and you're New Orleans, that's a pretty great pick for you to make. There's also the kid Schlesinger from UCLA who's made a lot of noise, who I imagine would be available at pick number 40. And of course, they've got other draft picks as well. Moving on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, credit to to Tampa Bay's front office. They went from, Brady and winning a Super Bowl and being very competitive in the NFC. We thought they're really going to fall off, and they've continued to be a playoff team. since Brady's been gone, under Baker Mayfield and under the other guys that they've put around him. The biggest thing that happened for them this offseason is that they re-signed wide receiver Chris Godwin. I really think that it is fair to say that the Godwin Evans wide receiver duo is one of the most undervalued, underappreciated wide receiver duos in not just like current NFL, but honestly like in NFL history, man. Like they are so dynamic. It really helps when Mike Evans literally has never had a year in the NFL where he hasn't had 1,000 receiving yards, which is just crazy. But all that being said, Tampa Bay, they sign edge Hassan Reddick. They sign corner Kendall Vildor, tackle Charlie Heck, linebacker Anthony Walker. They re-sign Sterling Shepard. They sign Ioswa Opeta. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And they sign hashtag Riley Dixon for Heisman, punter out of Syracuse from years back. He had a perfect passer rating in his time at Syracuse and threw for 3 touchdowns on 3 pass attempts. So just want to give him his due. They re-signed Chris Godwin. They re-signed Ben Bredesen. They re-signed Levante David. They re-signed Anthony Nelson, Greg Gaines, and they re-signed Kyle Trask, which is an interesting note. I remember, I think it was two years ago. It was the offseason before Baker's first season. And it was like, oh man, we've got a QB competition between Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask. And we were like, really? We do? And Baker won the job. But Tampa Bay must really, really respect, appreciate, and see something out of Kyle Trask, especially as a backup. To me, I think it's similar to when the Steelers had Landry Jones on the roster for years and years and years as their backup, a guy that knew the system, knew the team, they trusted. Definitely not going to be your starting quarterback, but a guy that you want to have there because the team respects and trusts him in the event that something happens. But yeah, Nick, looking at this Tampa Bay Buccaneers team, I think corner is a need for them. Like Kendall Vildor was one of the corners that came in when the Lions were absolutely decimated on the defense by injuries. I saw what he had to offer. He's not a guy you bring in to be your starting corner. He's a guy you bring to be a rotational guy. So definitely I think corner is a need for this team. They brought in Hassan Reddick, but I wouldn't mind them drafting an edge also. And you mentioned it or foreshadowed it when we were talking about the Saints and Levante David being back on a 1-year, $10 million deal, but definitely a guy that you'd enjoy if you're Tampa Bay, getting someone to mix in a little bit, learn from him, and be ready to take the reins. Excuse me. That's at first look, that's how I feel about this team. Nick, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm there with you, Jack. I feel like it's been pretty obvious that Levante David, just as I was saying with the Mario Davis, these are dudes who have played at a high level and been perpetually underrated as linebackers for years and years and years and years. And it just seems like they want to get that understudy, that next guy up, like a Swessinger, like you were saying in the second round, or what did you say the name was for the Alabama dude? I'm blanking. Campbell. Yeah, Campbell. Either of those dudes, if you could draft him, I feel like will pair really well for 1 year with David and could take over, I think, as being the main linebacker that Devin White wasn't able to be with Tampa Bay after he kind of fell out of favor there. I feel like outside of linebacker, though, you brought up some other really good points. I think that edge rush, I wouldn't probably go as a priority there because I feel like Hassan Reddick and then Yaya Diaby, I really like. I just think he's a crazy jacked athlete who's big and strong and fast and moves well. And they invested in Chris Braswell pretty high, I believe, in the second round last year. And he wasn't really able to play up to a second round pick kind of level last year. But I think that he still has the talent. I think that DB is definitely a need for this team. Where, as you were saying, I think corner's a need. And I think safety opposite Antoine Winfield is a need kind of long term, where Winfield's really, really, really good. And he did have injury issues, I believe, a year back. But opposite him right now, it's just Jordan Whitehead. And Jordan Whitehead, you want to have as a DB, but I don't know that you want to have him as a starting safety for the whole entire season. Because outside of those two dudes, you're talking about Christian Izzian, who can play decently well. And then you've just got like a bunch of corners, I feel like, that you want to be trying to fill in at corner because corners have been banged up for Tampa Bay a lot more. I'd also like to throw in, because you kind of gave the little shout out to Kyle Trask. I was just trying to reach back in my mind. I'm like, have I seen Kyle Trask play in an NFL game? I have no idea because I don't remember him starting an NFL game.
Yeah.
If you were to wild guess, how many pass attempts do you think he has in his NFL career?
Maybe 3.
You're not too far off. He's got 11. In 2022,
wow.
He completed 3 of 9 passes. And outside of that, 2023, 0 for 1, 2024, 1 for 1 for 5 yards. And then outside of that, it's 6 rushes for -5 yards. They're basically all kneel downs. And so this dude has played essentially 0 meaningful football in his NFL career. And going from being that, Baker Mayfield, Kyle Trask, it's going to be a competition, to literally has not played much of. He's played, how many snaps did it look like? It looks like he's played 6 rushes and 2 passes the last 2 years. So he's done 8 passes or rushes in 2 years total, which is insane. I don't know how I would rank quarterback as a need. I doubt it is. But just to see a player like that who is 27 years old and hasn't really done anything and was a second-round pick. But it's not that he hasn't done anything, like he's been playing and has sucked. Like, he just hasn't played. We don't really know.
Right.
But I think this team kind of falls into that bucket of not a lot of really, really big weaknesses, but they could go a couple of places, I think, that would make a lot of sense, as we've talked about before.
Definitely. I wouldn't be surprised if this team takes a running back later on, or signs a running back that they like as an undrafted free agent. Bucky Irving has emerged significantly. Reports going into this year is that they're probably going to be taking more snaps away from Rachaad White and giving them to Sean Tucker, because he had a really, really good year last year, especially in that game against the Saints that he accumulated I think 200 total yards or something. So I wouldn't be surprised with, just the way the running back cycle goes, that Rachaad White kind of falls out of favor and they bring in another young guy to be that running back 3 as that happens. So we've got edge, safety, and corner probably is the highest priority, though, again, would be great for them to get a linebacker. They only have 6 picks in this draft. They've got their 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, 5th, and 7th round picks. They have not acquired any picks in any trades, and they've also traded away their 6th round pick at some point for this upcoming draft. So I think, unlike some of these other teams that we've talked about that have 9, 10 draft picks, where it's like, hey, they can really let's just draft defensive guys, right? Like, we need defensive guys. I think Tampa Bay will need to be a little bit more careful and specific about, no, we need to make sure that we are drafting this position. And we may see a 3rd round pick, a guy taken in the 3rd round that it's like, wow, I would have taken him in the 4th or the 5th round. But Tampa Bay can't mess around. They really need to get their guys, and can't really risk much of that. All right, so just to wrap up the NFC South, Atlanta, we said edge, defensive tackle, and wide receiver as our top 3 needs for them. Carolina, we said wide receiver and just defense. You can get a little bit more specific there, but really just they need to fill some spots on defense and get a little better on the defensive side of the ball. With New Orleans, quarterback, safety, and edge. And with Tampa Bay, edge, safety, and corner. So moving on to the NFC West, we're starting with the one and only Arizona Cardinals. Whoop. Oh, I went too far. Hold on. Bring it back. There we go. The Arizona Cardinals. The Arizona Cardinals. They made a splash this offseason. And that big splash being getting edge Josh Sweat, signing him to a 4-year deal. They also signed Akeem Davis-Gaither, linebacker, to a 2-year deal. Dalvin Tomlinson to a 2-year deal. Jacoby Brissett to a 2-year deal. Bring him in for 2 years to be Kyler Murray's backup. They signed tackle Jack Curran to a 1-year deal. Wide receiver Simi Fehoko to a 1-year deal. They re-sign edge Baron Browning, guard Evan Brown, wide receiver Zay Jones, defensive lineman LJ Collier, and they signed Michael Walker and re-signed Aaron Brewer. So, Nick, the Arizona Cardinals, another team that I feel like, hey, they've got guys like I don't see a big glaring need on this team of like you do not have professional football players playing this position. You have guys that you're for like you have to run a guy out there, so you're running him out there, but like yikes. But also, you know, your biggest star is Kyler Murray, and we still kind of have those questions of like, hey, I think I think that's a position that you're like, we could get better than this, but also we could be far worse without him, and so let's just kind of stick with it. So yeah. So Nick, how do you feel about this Cardinals team? What do you feel the big additions that they need to make in the draft?
Mm-hmm. So there's also another big addition that's actually not on this list that I think super important that I think is just kind of newer, and so that's why it's not on here. That's Calais Campbell returning to the Arizona Cardinals.
True.
He's 38 years old, so he is ancient, but still playing at a pretty darn high level considering.
Yeah.
But when their two starting defensive interior players right now are Dalvin Tomlinson and Calais Campbell. Calais Campbell, as I said, 38 years old, ancient. And then you got Dalvin Tomlinson, who's 32 years old. You signed him to a pretty large deal, all things considering, 2 years, $29 million. But still, when those are your only two proven kind of defensive tackle dudes, they also drafted what's his name? Not Darius Alexander, was it? Was it Darius Robinson? That's who it was. Darius Robinson, they drafted last year out of Missouri. But he's kind of a hybrid, like 3-tech kind of edge rusher. And so I just think that going more specifically, that true interior kind of defensive lineman could be a really big add where it's not an immediate need, but it's definitely a need for a Gannon defense that likes to rotate in a bunch of defensive linemen and really likes having big pass rushing interior defensive linemen. And so I definitely could see them going that direction. That's the first immediate thing that I see with this roster. What about you, Jack? Anything particular stand out around Kyler Murray's Cardinals for you?
Yeah, I really like defensive tackle. I like them as maybe a Walter Nolan landing place in the first round. Maybe the other defensive tackle out of Michigan. One of those two guys. I don't hate that for them in the first round. This is another team that like I don't think I could name a single wide receiver on this team. Like let's look it up, right? Arizona Cardinals.
MHJ?
Why? Oh, okay, right. Duh. Oh my gosh. Yeah, thank you for that. Marvin Harrison Jr. But okay, outside of him, Zay Jones, who you just re-signed, Simi Fehoko, who you signed, Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch, Xavier Weaver, Tajuan Palmer, former Syracuse Orange Tristan Jackson. But like you have Marvin Harrison Jr. He did not have as productive a year last year as you were thinking. I think a lot of that has to do that defenses were like, who is the only guy that we're scared about touching the football that's running routes? That's Marvin Harrison Jr., right? So I wouldn't hate the Cardinals getting a wide receiver that can at least be an asset out there that teams at least need to think about. So definitely feel that. Also, I think corner could be a good thing for this team. Obviously I love Garrett Williams, again, another former Syracuse Orange. And he's had a very, very good career so far. But also, like, Arizona doesn't have that lockdown corner, right? They don't have that New England Patriots Stephon Gilmore. They don't have that. For the Lions last year, it was Carlton Davis. Anyway, you can go on and on. They don't have that guy, right? And so I think that could be a good spot for this team as well. I don't hate their offensive line. I don't love their offensive line. So maybe some later round draft picks that are depth guys that like, hey, if they pan out, then like great, we can make them starters. If not, we've got depth at the offensive line, which I don't think any team can have too much depth on their O line. They've got James Conner at running back. They could probably afford to get younger at that position. Really, like, quarterback and tight end are the only positions on this team that I'm like, you don't have to spend draft capital to get better here. Like, you could. You could draft a quarterback, right, and be like, yeah, let's see if he can compete with Kyler. But if you're thinking about doing that, this is not the draft to do that. And so that's really how I view it. I like your assessment with defensive tackle, interior defensive lineman, and yeah, I think receiver and corner, maybe safety, but receiver and a defensive skilled position is sort of where I'm at. How do you feel about that?
I get that. I can rock with those for the most part. I'm also just concerned. I was looking at it. I'm like, okay, they have names that I know at the linebacker position, but they don't have names that I like at the linebacker position, respectfully. Mack Wilson Sr. played for the Browns for a couple of years, played for the Patriots a couple of years. I don't know that you want him being your main linebacker. Akeem Davis-Gaithers, he is a linebacker. I don't know that you want him to be a starting linebacker. Baron Browning, primarily moving around more to edge than linebacker. And then you get to Owen Papo, or Papoe. I still don't know how to pronounce his name. And he hasn't really thrust himself into a starting role either. And so I look at it, I'm like, okay, you have bodies, but you don't have anybody who changes the game at the linebacker position. So sure. I really think that could be another position to address.
Yeah. Arizona, like Tampa Bay, only 6 draft picks. They've got their own picks in rounds 1 through 4, or 1 through 5, and then they have a 7th round pick from the New York Jets. So there's another team that, they need to be a little bit more specific, a little more careful than some of these other teams that we've talked about that, are just trying to improve everywhere. So we'll say defensive tackle, wide receiver, and I like what you had to say at linebacker. So we'll give the nod to linebacker there. Moving on to the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams, everyone is basically penning in that the Rams are going to take a quarterback at pick number 26. And I really, really disagree with that. I think that would be very foolish for the Los Angeles Rams to take a quarterback at pick 26. I understand that the Rams for years are like, have been like, hey, we need to figure out what we're going to do once Matthew Stafford retires. But you did just sign him to an extension. If you're signing him to an extension, that means you still want to compete with him as your quarterback. And so I think it would be foolish to use a first-round draft pick on a quarterback here. But regardless, let's kind of go through their offseason. Obviously, the big news, they did get an extension done with Matthew Stafford. They also signed Devontae Adams to a 2-year, $46 million deal. Now, if you were signing him to a 2-year, $46 million deal circa 2 years ago, I'm like, yeah. Now, honestly, I feel like that's a little bit of an overpay, but also you can always make the argument Raiders and Jets, right? Like, look at the quarterback play that he had in those two spots. How much can we really say is like, oh no, he's fallen off, and how much is it, he was catching passes from Jimmy Garoppolo and Aaron Rodgers post Achilles. That being said, other moves, they signed Poona Ford to a 3-year, $30 million deal. They signed center Coleman Shelton. They signed linebacker Nate Landman. They re-signed Alaric Jackson, re-signed Jimmy G, re-signed Tutu Atwell, re-signed Laryl Murchison, re-signed Akello Witherspoon, re-signed Ronnie Rivers, again, restructured with Matthew Stafford. They release Cooper Kupp, and they trade Jonah Jackson, which I think are two very, very interesting moves that Los Angeles made that I think, at least for me, would sort of sway what I think the Rams need to do here in the draft. But Nick, I'll let you have the floor. What do you think of the Rams here?
So the Rams, I think when I was digging around here with the Rams, I saw a lot of people pre-free agency specifically saying wide receiver. That was before we knew exactly what was going to happen with Kupp as far as staying or traded or cut. And he ended up being cut and landing on the Seahawks. But they were thinking, we need a replacement. We need somebody to replace Kupp. And so getting Devontae Adams in there to be a guy who can separate, he'll probably play more slot than anything else. He can play outside, but I think his movement ability in the slot's really good. And so I think receiver, I think they're good at receiver. I don't think they have to invest really highly there, even though Devontae Adams is just kind of a rental for a year or 2 years, maybe. But I really look at linebacker being a big need right now. Troy Reeder, they only signed back for a 1-year deal. And I look at corner being a really massive need right now. They have Akello Witherspoon starting, and you don't want Akello Witherspoon starting for a whole year. You just don't want that. And Darius Williams has bounced around back to the Jaguars, back here to the Rams again. And so I just think that corner is a spot that you can really invest highly in, a position that you haven't since trading for Jalen Ramsey here. So I look at corner, I look at linebacker. I think there are other spots. I think potentially on the defensive line at edge you could see. But I look primarily on the defense. I'm leaning towards edge and linebacker. How are you feeling, Jack? You're muted.
Thank you. They decided to mow the lawn right now. So I like linebacker. I like corner. Definitely. Yeah, like you said, Kello Witherspoon, he's a rotational guy. It's the same thing that I said about Kendall Vildor when we were talking about Tampa Bay. So definitely like corner. And I like where they're picking at 26 at potential corners that they could get. There are definitely some guys that are going to be around there that they could go get. I hear you on edge. Yeah, I hear you on edge. I agree with that. When I think about their offense, though, and I mentioned, they traded Jonah Jackson. I think similar to where my Lions are at with losing Kevin Zeitler, you're going to want to get an interior offensive lineman in this draft. Even if it isn't to, immediately jump in and start at that position, but just to have depth, have a guy there that you can plug in there if need be. But I give the lean towards edge before guard. So basically corner, linebacker, and edge. Basically interior defensive lineman is the only part of the defense, and safety is the only parts of the defense that we're like, yeah, no, those are good.
Tight end, I could also give a pretty big shout. Normally, I think of Tyler Higbee as being pretty reliable, but he got injured a year and change ago, something like that. And last year, he didn't even produce 100 total yards on the whole season, and he hasn't really been able to bounce back. And so if he's not able to be a steady producer, you're depending on Colby Parkinson, who can be a tight end 2, can be a tight end 3. So I think that tight end, a position that gets washed away pretty easily in our minds, could be a spot where they could definitely invest in rounds 2, 3, or 4.
Yeah, definitely. Let's look real quick at the Rams draft picks, because for a while we didn't even need to look it up because we knew they didn't have any. But they've
They
gone.
traded away their second to get the Fiske last year. They
Okay,
traded away their second this year to move forward, I believe, last year.
so they've got 8 picks. They've got the number 26 overall pick. They've got 2 third-round picks, pick 90, and then a compensatory pick 101. They've got a 4th-round pick in 127, then 4 6th-round picks. Pick 190, 195, 201, and 202. One from Atlanta, one from Pittsburgh, and one from Chicago. So they do have picks. They're not great picks. They're not great moving up picks. But we'll see what they do there. So we'll put corner, linebacker, and I think I like tight end more than edge now that you mention it. For this team. Seattle, the Seahawks. The Seahawks had a busy offseason, at least with big splashes. They sign Sam Darnold to a 3-year, $100.5 million deal. They sign Cooper Kupp. They signed DeMarcus Lawrence. They signed Marcus Valdes-Scantling, so he's no longer on the Saints, like I mentioned earlier. They signed Marcus Valdes-Scantling. They signed Josh Jones, DeAnthony Bell, James Proche, Steven Sims, Eric Salbert, River Craycraft.
Yep.
I don't think I've ever even heard that name before.
Around. Yep.
Yeah. Shamar Jean-Charles, Ernest Jones, Jaron Reed, and Josh Ross are all re-signed. They traded Geno Smith. They traded DK Metcalf. And then they released Tyler Lockett, Draymond Jones, Roy Robertson Harris, Rayshawn Jenkins, and George Fant. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of names, a lot of movement going on there. I really like the Sam Darnold move for them, especially with the deal. Like, it's not that big. It's not, a cataclysmic deal that, like, hey, if this doesn't work out, like, you are absolutely screwed. Cooper Kupp, I do think, has gas in the tank. I think I'd rather do a 2-year, $30 million deal for him. I don't hate the amount you're paying him per year, but to tie yourself to him for 3 years, I think might be a little too much. I like the DeMarcus Lawrence deal. But that being said, the Seattle team, I look at the stuff that they did, and I feel like they just changed, but they didn't really do things that made them better, if that makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if Sam Darnold produces, like, moving forward the way he produced for Minnesota through their first 16 games that they played last year, then okay, that is definitely an improvement. But you trade DK Metcalf, which I think that was fine. That was necessary for them as they're kind of moving into a little bit of a rebuild, and him wanting the money that he wanted. So I'm fine with that. But you cut Tyler Lockett and then bring in Cooper Kupp. That just feels, it not quite lateral. It feels like a little bit of a step up. But again, not like this is a significant change. This is making this team significantly better. And yeah, Nick, before we start talking about what we think their needs are, how do you feel about the Seahawks team, like, with what they did this offseason?
It seems like this offseason was kind of retooling offseason, where when you get a new head coach in a team, I think that the head coach is trying to bridge where the team was to where the team needs to go to kind of be in this coach's image. And I think that this was kind of that season of Pete Carroll's team becoming their new head coach's team. I'm blanking on his name, the former Ravens DC.
Mike Macdonald.
Mike Macdonald, yes, that's correct. But I think this is kind of bridging going towards Mike Macdonald's team, where it seemed like Geno Smith was obviously a Pete Carroll guy. He got traded to be with Pete Carroll right now, so he's back with Pete, and he was clearly a Pete Carroll guy. DK Metcalf, there's obviously the old school clip, if you remember from draft day, of Pete Carroll taking his shirt off with DK Metcalf in the pre-draft when they were at their meeting at the combine. And it seemed like DK was definitely that regime and that energy, and he really wasn't able to be that same guy this last year or so when he was with Mike McDonald and on this team. And so it feels like it's just kind of been a retooling of not getting rid of guys because they're bad and not getting rid of guys because they're way too old, but kind of getting rid of dudes that don't fit what you want the team to become. And so it just seems like they were kind of retooling. And retooling doesn't mean trading away all your good players so you'll be bad and tank. Like Sam Darnold being signed for 3 years, $100 million. That's not a tanking move. Signing Cooper Kupp to a 3-year deal isn't a tanking move. It just feels like trading Tyler Lockett. He was their primary older dude, veteran kind of leader guy that they really traded away outside of sort of Geno, where it seems like they're kind of trying to start a new era with the Seahawks. And it seems like they're just kind of getting in dudes to kind of paint a new image. Where DeMarcus Lawrence, I don't know exactly what he brings as far as his leadership, but he's still a stable edge presence, good at defending the run, and a professional. And I think that Sam Darnold with Cooper Kupp, you can hear him chat about all sorts of technical wide receiver offensive things. And that's something that Sam Darnold's gonna need to get better at, where the intelligence side of the game of Darnold's big enough, strong enough, mobile enough to be able to play, but he also throws it into triple coverage kind of stuff way too often. And potentially having a dude to be able to help him think through the game in Cooper Kupp could really kind of help develop him in a way that they want to be going. But I agree with you that it doesn't seem like they got better anywhere, and it doesn't seem like they got way, way worse anywhere. But they definitely are changing for a particular reason. And I think that reason's because of the head coach.
Yeah, no, completely agree there. So looking at this team and its needs, I think especially with Sam Darnold as your quarterback, you really need to make a point to get a strong offensive line. We sort of saw in the playoff game and the season finale in Detroit what he looks like when things get bad in the pocket. And so you definitely want to make sure that you're keeping him upright as much as possible. I see as a big move for them. I like their running back room right now with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, right, out of UCLA. I think they like their running back room. Defensively, and maybe it's just because we had that long time when we had the Legion of Boom that it was like, man, you could name so many just dudes on that defense, right? I feel like we don't really have that as much anymore. I can't really, especially in the front seven. They've got some noteworthy guys on the back end, Devin Witherspoon, for example. But I think defense is the way that offensive line and like front, basically the trenches is where I lean to with this team draft wise. Nick, what do you think?
So I definitely would lean the same way as you. I think specifically looking at offensive guard, that Christian Hayes and Anthony Bradford are your projected guards right now. And I think that those two dudes don't have much experience at all. And you could really use a guard, where it seems like guard's one of those positions that the threshold to be a starter isn't that high. But definitely these are two dudes who don't have a track record of being above that threshold kind of thing. So I think specifically offensive guard, and with McDonald coming from the Ravens, coming from a team that run the ball, physical, interior, want to run it straight down your throat, be dynamic in the run game, I think that they definitely could go offensive guard. And when I also kind of look at receiver as far as outside receiver, where JSN is a really good receiver, but he's a really, really good slot receiver. Cooper Kupp's a good receiver. He's a good slot receiver, though, especially at this phase in his career. I don't think he's running away from anybody, especially on the outside.
Yeah.
So that leaves, okay, Jake Bobo, he showed you some good things, but he's not a dog on the outside, just win physically, athletically, run by dudes. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, there's a reason that he's available and that he's here right now with this team. And I don't really think you want him as your primary outside receiver playing a majority of the outside snaps. And so I look at outside receiver, I look at guard. I think that defense, there are a couple of spots on the defense that I think you could look at as well.
Agreed. Seattle has 10 draft picks this year. So they've got a lot of room to improve. Or not a lot of room to improve, excuse me, but a lot of capital to use to improve. They've got number 18 overall. They have 2 second-round picks, pick 50 and pick 52, who they obviously got from your Steelers in the DK Metcalf trade. They have pick 82 and 92 in round 3. They have a compensatory 4th-round pick, 2 compensatory 5th-round picks, and then 2 7th-round picks. So they have picks to use. They have picks to use as capital to move up if they want. So I think this could be a really, really good draft. Between this offseason and this draft, a really, really good, true changing of the guard from, like you said, Pete Carroll's team to Mike McDonald's team. So, yeah. All right. San Francisco, our last team here to wrap it up. I went way too far because they're here. San Francisco, man, San Francisco is weird. A very, very weird offseason. So they signed Luke Farrell to a 3-year deal. They signed DeMarcus Robinson to a 2-year deal. They signed Mac Jones to be their backup quarterback. Long snapper Jason Weeks, corner Sierra Neal, safety Ricky Grant, linebacker Luke Gifford, safety Jason Pinnock, running back Patrick Taylor Jr., corner Trey Brown. They re-signed Kyle Juszczyk after. Didn't they cut him and then re-sign him to a new deal, or was it just we're not going to re-sign you, but then they worked out a deal?
I think they might have released him.
Yeah, I think they released him. Yeah, at the bottom there, released fullback Kyle Juszczyk. So they released him, but then brought him back on a 2-year deal. They re-signed Kevin Givens. They re-signed linebacker Curtis Robinson. They extended guard Ben Barch. They traded Deebo Samuel. They traded Jordan Mason, and they released those guys at the bottom. But this does not tell the whole story, because you know the guys that they lost in free agency? You know the guys that they lost in free agency? They lost Dre Greenlaw, Javon Hargrave, Charvarius Ward. They also lost Leonard Floyd, Malik Collins, Tabor Pepper. They also lost Talanoa Hufanga. So I'd look at this right here, and I look at, man, they brought in a lot of defensive guys, right? But you know what they didn't bring in? A single guy that is at the caliber of the guys that they lost. And I know that San Francisco, it's been, like 10 years now of either they miss the playoffs or they make the NFC Championship game. And if you ask me right now, this is a team that is not going to make the playoffs. This is a team that has gone – I mean, we talk about the losing in the Super Bowl regression. Boy, have they fallen off from losing in overtime to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl to not making the playoffs last year. Now, granted, lots of injury issues, of course, but to now, I mean, they might. If I look at their roster, just looking at their roster right now, I am very concerned about this team. Even potentially making the playoffs again this year. So Nick, are we in agreement there? Do you see it a little bit? Are you a little more optimistic than I am, or what?
I'm a little more optimistic in terms of they still have a couple of high-end players. And if those high-end players stay healthy, I think that the team could be good. Where Brock Purdy, when he didn't annihilate his elbow against the Eagles in the NFC Championship, has been pretty darn healthy. I think that McCaffrey, if McCaffrey's healthy, is a game changer. I think Kittle, if Kittle's healthy, game changer. I think Ayuk, if he stays healthy, comes back from his ACL tear, I think he can be really good. I think that Bosa on the defense is really good. I think Fred Warner on the defense is really good. But it seems like to be able to win at a high level, kind of need the stars to align, where it doesn't seem like they have a margin for error that some of these other teams have. And so to me, it feels like this 49ers team is on a razor's edge as far as getting to any sort of winning level this year. It seems like maybe they could, but that's a really small keyhole to try and fit into here. You feeling the same about it, Jack, or you don't even think there's a keyhole to get through to be able to be competitive this year?
No, I do, but I mean, all of those guys you mentioned on the offensive side of the ball outside of Brock Purdy are hecka injury prone, right? So like, you know, I view the San Francisco 49ers as a team that their defense is what's going to, over the last few years, right? Since Brock Purdy has taken over, their defense is the thing that's going to, lead them to success. Now, that is not me not being a believer in Brock Purdy. I'm absolutely on the side of Brock Purdy has proven that he is a great quarterback in the NFL. We saw what Jimmy Garoppolo and what Trey Lance looked like with all of those same weapons, and we saw what Brock Purdy has looked like. So the whole he has such a great team around him is bull crap. As an excuse to say that he's not that great of a quarterback, right? And I say that with all quarterbacks that question is asked. That being said, like, I think because of how injury prone those guys on offense are, you really need to have a really, really consistent defense if you're this team. And the fact is, the guys that made their defense really good and consistent, so many of them are not here anymore, right? Like, I really do not trust the back end of this defense. Like, I really, really don't. I think if this current 49ers team were to play the current Lions team, like, Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery wouldn't get the ball handed off to them because it would just be Jared Goff throwing darts over the middle of the field that, Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown are basically left wide open the whole time, right? And that's a really, really good passing offense. I think even a slightly good passing offense, would really have their way with this secondary. And so sort of letting that lead us into what the biggest needs are for this team. Like, I think I understand that Trent Williams is old and a lot of people are thinking, hey, this might be the time to draft an offensive tackle. Maybe the kid out of Ohio State that got hurt, give him a chance to sit behind Trent Williams and learn and take over for him. I totally get that. I think that's the move that you make if you're the 49ers and you are like, we're doing a soft rebuild. If you're the 49ers, that's like, no, this season will be 2 seasons removed from making the Super Bowl and we're still competitive, then that's not the move to make, because again, you've got glaring holes to me in the secondary, in particular on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I don't know that I think the holes are quite as glaring in terms of the style of defense they play. I don't know necessarily that you need badass corners, where Charvarius Ward was solid to good, but Charvarius Ward was never a lockdown, like, man you up kind of lockdown corner to me. And they lost him, yeah. But the thing is, they lost him and they have a Demador Lenore and what's the other corner they have? And a Renardo Green, who I think can be interesting, a Trey Brown, who I think can play some snaps. They don't have good corners, but I feel like their defense doesn't necessarily have to. I feel like the bigger issue than their corner play is potentially their defensive line play. Because Nick Bosa right now is the only dude who you have to worry about whatsoever on their whole defensive line. And I think that Fred Warner is the only linebacker who you have to worry about at linebacker. And so I think that sets up for the secondary to look way worse than it is potentially, because of the lack of pressure by the defensive line. Mm-hmm. Where I think that in the past, you're looking at Hargrave, you're looking at DeForest Buckner, you're looking at Eric Armstead. And those dudes can get pressure. You're looking at Young when he was on this roster as well. I just feel like you're looking at a bunch of dudes who were able to get a ton of pressure. And because they got a ton of pressure, the corners were able to be solid and look really good because of the defensive line. I think the regression of this defensive line is going to make the defense as total in the defensive secondary as you're talking about look terrible, terrible. I don't know that the secondary is as bad as you think it is, but I think it could look worse than I think it is, which I think is a testament to how bad this defense overall is. Where Warner and Bosa are really, really good, but besides them, you don't even have like starter kind of dudes. I feel like that are good starters besides them.
Yeah, I'm looking right now just to see how many draft picks they have coming up in this draft.
I also just feel like when you look at this team, it feels like they've kind of looked at the most important positions and said, we'll invest highly in that important position and then ignore a bunch of the rest of the roster. Or it's like, we need a pass rusher. There's Nick Bosa. And it's like, okay, you have somebody to rush the left tackle. Awesome. What about the rest of your defensive line? And it's like, we don't have one. It's like, you invest highly in your offensive line. It's like left tackle. The left tackle is the most important dude. Do you have the rest of an O-line? No, we have a solid rest of our offensive line, but we have a stud left tackle, and the rest are just kind of guys.
Right.
And so it feels like they've invested super highly in a couple of spots, but let the rest of it kind of go to the wayside.
Yeah. And all this to say, so far we've just talked about the defense. I mean, you trade Deebo Samuel, which is not the Deebo Samuel of old, but still a starting wide receiver 2 on your team. And you signed DeMarcus Robinson. I know you like Ricky Pearsall, but still there's going to be a little regression there, just out of just pure, you went from a veteran to, not a rookie, but an inexperienced player. You trade Jordan Mason. You're San Francisco and you trade Jordan Mason? Like, that Christian McCaffrey, like the biggest if in NFL history, not NFL history, the biggest if in the NFL every single season is if Christian McCaffrey is healthy, right? Since he's come into the league, that's what we ask every single year. Well, this team, if Christian McCaffrey is healthy, you got a proven commodity in Jordan Mason last year at running back, and then you trade him away, right? So, like, I'm concerned about them at running back. I'm concerned about them not as much at wide receiver, but still a little bit at wide receiver because we don't know Brandon Ayuk's situation coming back from a torn ACL. You mentioned that defensive front, which they lost Javon Hargrave, they lost Dre Greenlaw, they lost Leonard Floyd, from their front seven, right? Like that is, I agree with you that I think maybe the players themselves aren't the fall off isn't that significant, but the sort of the grand total loss is going to make everything feel a little bit worse. So that being said, looking at San Francisco when it comes to needs in the draft, I think defensive line definitely. Because I agree with you. I think maybe the secondary doesn't look as bad if the front seven is playing better. So let's say defensive line. I don't think I would put running back as a top 3 need for this team, but I also think that of their 11 draft picks, if one isn't used on a running back, like that would be a mistake. Again, don't think it's a top 3 need, but I think it's something that you have to invest something in, this draft. So yeah, defensive line. What else do you think?
Would you say linebacker is a bigger need, or would you say secondary is a bigger need? Because I think that with the loss of Dre Greenlaw, it's like, okay, you have Ward, but if Ward's injured, if Ward and Bosa are injured, I don't know who makes a play on your defense, to be honest. I don't know who's a playmaker on your defense if either of those guys are injured. If both of them are injured, I think your defense will be atrocious. I think with them, your defense might be okay, but okay is not going to cut it when you're trying to contend. So I'd look at linebacker. I think if you want to put something in the secondary over linebacker, I wouldn't be having an issue with that. But I definitely think that defensive line, the edge opposite Bosa and defensive tackle are massive needs.
Yeah. No, I like linebacker because we've only talked about pass defense so far. Imagine if they don't fill out their front seven and like you can run all over them too, right? Like so we'll say defensive line.
I think your Lions could run them off the field. I think you could win a game without Amon-Ra St. Brown and J-Mo making a bunch of big plays. I think they could just be third down dudes and you could just run the ball down their throats, period, anyway, probably.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. So we'll say defensive line, linebacker, maybe
O-line or secondary. I think left tackle with Williams, or I think left guard with Ben Barch. Those are both pretty big needs.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll say offensive line. We'll say left offensive line. So yeah, so there we have it. We have gone through the whole NFL pre-draft. To circle back through the NFC West first, Arizona defensive tackle, wide receiver, linebacker, Los Angeles Rams corner, linebacker, tight end, Seattle offensive guard and wide receiver, San Francisco defensive line, linebacker, and left side offensive line. And so there we have it. That is the whole NFL, all of their needs according to us before the draft. Just two guys that like to talk football, so don't. But anyway, that was really, really awesome, really great. Next week, a week from today, is the first round of the NFL draft. I'm pleased to say that what we are going to do is we're going to live stream during the draft. So come hang out with us, have the draft on, but have it muted, have us on in the background. That's what we're going to be doing. And yeah, we're gonna talk through it, do our own little draft show. We'll probably hop on like a half hour before it's supposed to start, 15 minutes, half hour before it's supposed to start, just to talk a little bit through, some of the big questions that are going to get answered there on night one. And then yeah, we're gonna hit it. We're gonna enjoy ourselves. It's gonna be a long night, but it's gonna be a lot of fun. So we're really, really excited that we have the freedom and the flexibility that we're gonna be able to do this. So please tune into that because we're really, really excited about it.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for tuning in, for watching, and we'll see you next time.